Welcome to the InnerVerse. It's an illusion.
Welcome to the One Within All to another episode of InnerVerse Podcast. I'm your host, Chance, and in our quest to better understand the cosmos and our place in it, increasing our comprehension of the creators who came before us is of capital importance, as the analysis of ancestors leads us to answers about ourselves and our present moment potential and the possibilities of the future. Is human civilization progressing in a uniform pattern, building on itself with a little backsliding here and there? Or is our chronological development ruled by cyclical forces, with peaks and troughs of higher consciousness that fall down into darker ages, only to eventually restart our ascent up the monomyth's great mountain, regaining our godly selves at the top of eternity's sine wave? From looking extensively into alternate opinions on the good old days, it's my opinion that the chronological cover-ups and lies agreed upon that comprise most authorized textbook teachings on antiquity seem mostly concerned with pinning society's evolutionary processes on the great men and their wars that fill most of our school days notebooks on the subject. And online conversations around these things often tend towards high-octane speculation and assertions built upon assumptions with little substance anchored in certainty. Thus, one of the things I enjoy most about a returning guest for this episode is his grounded approach to archeoastronomy, his studies and teachings tending to always bring things back down to earth by keeping the conversation centered on ancient artifacts, languages, and the universality of the great celestial scripture in the sky comprised of stars and constellations. In the last year, John McHugh has joined the InnerVerse podcast twice already with a fantastic revelation of the celestial nativity scene of Christ as it appears in the night sky, and a deep dive into the symbolism contained in the Pegasus Square constellation, both topics derived from his long-running research presented in the book The Celestial Code of Scripture, the astral cipher underlying the miracle stories of the Bible and Quran. But as groundbreaking and truly exciting as that book and the many secrets it reveals may be, in this conversation we're shifting gears and jumping continents to explore the other major realm of John's academic career in studying Southwest Native American rock art through the ages. As always, John comes thoroughly prepared, and I'm excited to see what he's got in store for us this time, as this is a subject I know a lot less about. So if you are just listening to the audio-only version of the podcast, you might want to pop over and see the video and catch these slideshow images that John's got prepared. But you've been warned. I'm sure it'll be good to listen to too. So let's get into this thing. Everybody, welcome back the astonishing investigator of stellar scriptures and revealer of the megalithic monomyth, John McHugh. Welcome back, buddy.
Thanks so much, Chance. It's wonderful to be back on InnerVerse, and I hope I can share some of my passion and some of my research with you into Native American rock art. It's much different than the linguistic stuff I do. I almost live in two worlds. One of my worlds is archeoastronomy and astrology embedded in the Bible and the Quran, and the other one is not linguistic at all. It's pre-literate, and it's dealing with Native American rock art, which is incredibly enigmatic and primal. And as you'll see in the next few slides. So the presentation, we had been going back and forth, and I thought, well, I could share a presentation with you entitled Native American Rock Art Through the Ages, especially from the Southwestern perspective, which is my expertise. Native Americans throughout the continental North America made rock art, but my specialty is just in the Southwestern Native American rock art, especially connected to the Four Corners area of Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah. So who am I? Well, again, some of these slides have been spliced together from other presentations I've done. So I'm a licensed archaeologist. I'm an archaeologist for the Utah Rock Art Research Association and Utah Cultural Astronomy Project. I have a specialty in archeoastronomy. It's how ancient cultures utilized and understood astronomical knowledge. But I also have a K through 12 teaching license. And I lead, much of what I do is I lead youth groups on excursions to learn about, steward, and document prehistoric Native American rock art for the Bureau of Land Management, State Historic Preservation Office, National Forest Service, and other entities. So when I go it's ironic, I'm either in an ancient studies room with a bunch of lexicons surrounding me, or I'm in the field looking at rock art, either researching it from an archeoastronomy point of view, or finding it and cataloging it with a group of students. So here's an example of these kids right here. There's I have an archaeology club called the Shovel Bums, and these kids found a petroglyph. There's a petroglyph of a deer right there that's really ancient.
Wow. So you're finding stuff as you go.
Oh yeah. Some of the kids are finding stuff that have never been discovered by an archaeologist before. So if you're 12, this is the last word in entertainment, so to go
Well, I think it's cool that you guys are making discoveries. I didn't realize that part of it. I just wanted to point out how the question of authenticity of dating, or the potential of some petroglyphs being later forgeries and stuff of that nature, it becomes a lot less of a likelihood when you're finding new stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and the other thing that's really important, and I don't know how familiar your researchers are, but I mean some of the kids that I teach present at the Utah Symposium, the Utah Rock Art Research Association Symposium, because they're trying to get as many lay people and students to preserve and protect this rock art, because it gets defaced all the time. People shoot it out with bullets, they spray paint it, they carve their names and initials in it. So these kids are going out in the field with me, and one of my students right there, Elena, she is demonstrating her atlatl throwing ability in one of our meetings. And so this other boy right here, Cyrano, he did a science fair project on what killed the mammoth, his theory being that it was the atlatl that made the mammoth go extinct. So the kids, I'm the author of this Celestial Code of Scripture, but when I go in the field, I'm pretty much looking at Native American rock art, and several early chapters in that book focus on Native American celestial mythology and rock art. So the big tool of an archaeologist when you go out in the field and you do an excavation is stratigraphy. The premise being that the deeper down you go, the older the material is. And that's pretty much all across the globe. In rare occasions, you'll have something called reverse stratigraphy, because you're digging into an ancient trash mound, and everything ends up getting dug up in reverse. But that's how you tell time. You go down, and the further down you go, the older things are. So what we're going to be looking at tonight is, so if you go back in time, Utah, it's named after the Ute Indians. And as you go back in time, you have the Puebloan period, and then it goes back to a time called the basket maker period, and the Archaic period, which is before farming, and then to the Paleo-Indian period, that's the megafauna hunters. They're the ones that are hunting mammoth, mastodon, giant ground sloth.
I want to point out, just because I'm very interested in the language side of things and the philology, right? Yeah. So one of the one of the phonetics that comes up a lot when studying the potential of a sort of universal religious or priest class system. I say universal as in maybe not like an empire per se, but something that was able to touch many or all parts of the world at a certain depth in history. And one of the names that comes up repeatedly, whether it's the ancient Hebrews or even the Jews of India, is this word Yuda or Judah. Yeah, and when you see Ute, I mean Utah, it's basically Judah.
Yeah, you could get Uda. Yeah, you could get that into it. Yeah, that vowel in the front, they interchange. And T's and D's are the same letter.
Exactly.
Whether you're aspirating or holding the air in when you say duh, and then tuh, you blow the air out of your mouth. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There's something in linguistics they refer to as false cognates, so that I have a research partner named John Lundvall, and he is outstanding. And if you've ever seen his videos, you really should have him on your program. But he is just remarkable at making connections. And I'm always the party pooper. I'm always like, yeah, but could we get that published in a scientific peer-reviewed journal? So that's where the trouble comes in. There's a lot of these cognates, and they're so hard to prove. And you got to wonder how many of them are actual and how many of them are, false. And,
totally. Yeah. I look at it like maybe that's not enough for a claim in and of itself, but it's one point. And if you get maybe 3 strikes that connect the culture, especially language wise, say 8, 10, 20 words that have similar root meanings from one civilization to another, then you're cooking, but but it's key to just be able to pick up those connections, even if it ends up being a false cognate, because if you find enough, then you have a lot more of a case.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that. That's in essence what the Book of Mormon is based on. I mean, that's what the Book of Mormon is based on the idea that there was a Jewish civilization here in pre-literate times. And the only thing they wrote on were these golden plates that were retrieved by an angel. And that's why no one can find them anymore. Well, Joseph Smith translated them, and then they were returned to the angel. That's how the story of the Book of Mormon goes. Again, I'm not Mormon. That's the general overview that I learned when I went to BYU. So I know a fair amount about just the overall beliefs of the LDS Church.
What is interesting, the Mormon connection being that they are very centered in Utah. Yeah.
It is interesting. There's a scholar named Barry Fell, and I can't remember his book. It's like, I forget, it's like America Lost or something like that. He was a Harvard oceanographer who made some pretty strong arguments for people from the Middle East having showed up and having examples of Arabic in North America, in rock art writing. So it's interesting, but I'm just going to keep going through the slides because I got a bunch of them. So when you think of Paleo-Indian times, Native Americans probably came here either over a land bridge or through or through boats. There's a theory called the rafting theory. Probably got here about 25,000 years ago, before present, and up until 6,000 BC, they were big game hunters, as in mammoth, mastodon, giant ground sloth. They had to avoid saber-toothed tigers. Then the climate warmed about 6,000 BC. You get what's called in Southwest, the desert archaic adaptation, which is people living an archaic lifestyle. All the fauna and flora are the modern varieties that you find today. That evolved into the basket makers who started to rely on agriculture, the Three Sisters, corn first, then beans and squash. And I'm real rough here with these dates. So roughly 0 to 700 AD, give or take a few hundred years, depending on where you're at.
Of course, yeah. It's not like a civilization, a certain year rolls around and they're like, all right, now we're doing everything different, new era.
Yeah,
it's always gradual.
Right. And so like Pueblo 1, roughly 700 AD. It started earlier, some areas it started a little bit later. And then it gets to the big Pueblos that you refer to as like Chaco Canyon, where you've got like 5-story Pueblos, places like some of the Pueblos in Chaco Canyon are 900 rooms. I mean, just gigantic. If you can ever go to Chaco Canyon, it's literally an outdoor museum. I mean, just gigantic Pueblos, kivas, all around in the middle of nowhere. And that evolved into the Pueblo 3 period. That's where you see a lot of the cliff dwellings, like you see at Mesa Verde. That's a Pueblo 3 adaptation where people were building in cliffs as if they're hiding from something, as if they've got to be worried about some kind of they've got martial concerns. They're worried about what seems like getting robbed, getting attacked. So people start building in cliffs. There's a picture of Mesa Verde right there, one of the Pueblos.
Yeah, it seems to coincide with, many regions of the world had all of a sudden a trend of building underground, building in tunnels and all that. You really see it in ancient Anatolia or modern day Turkey. Yeah, I've seen, I know what you're talking about. Although I haven't studied that in depthly, it is a worldwide thing. It's pretty, it's a ubiquitous human phenomenon. Possibly because when you live underground, it's really easy to control the heat. I mean, it stays pretty much the same temperature. You're between like 65, 70 degrees all year round. You know what I mean? Even if it's snowing out, it's easy to warm with a little fire. But one of the big mysteries of what we're talking about tonight is you had just hundreds of Pueblos in Utah and Colorado, and they all just get abandoned. They're just abandoned almost entirely by 1300 AD. And the Native Americans move down and they conglomerate in the Pueblos along the Rio Grande River and some of the other, like Acoma Pueblo, Zia Pueblo, and then in the Hopi Mesas in Arizona. So that's where the Pueblos are today. But in 1300 AD, a lot of those populations were living in Utah and Colorado. The big mystery is, why did they leave? Why did they make this massive migration and reestablish these gigantic Pueblos that you see now? Like the most famous one's probably the one at Taos, right? The one right there. That's Taos from a few years ago. My wife and I go there frequently. There's a photograph we took. And you can see it's 3-4-story Pueblo. It was built in like 1100. They started the foundation. So it's a pretty old house, a pretty old apartment. So if we can begin, there's your typical petroglyph, right? So, here's another petroglyph you see in Utah, really ubiquitous, right? All over the place, thousands and thousands of these rock art sites. And they are enigmatic. They just suck you in, almost the way an impressionist painting or some modern art sucks you in, because you're trying to figure out automatically, what does it mean? That last one almost feels like the silhouette of some kind of Sumerian character.
Yeah, it does. It does have that look. Yeah, and you got to wonder if in our brain we have certain images that we just reproduce for the human figure. There's another petroglyph there, what could be like a sun, maybe. There's what looks like a birthing scene. The figure on the left could be some kind of female deity giving birth. Native Americans were known to give birth standing up and use gravity as the means to pull the baby, the newborn, out of the birth canal of the mother. So there's what you had up on actually your original screen. That's called Newspaper Rock and Canyonlands. Dates, that that rock art, if you go, it's the oldest stuff's at the bottom, and then it gets younger as it goes up. And you can see bison there. You can see there's a Native American on a horse. When you see a Native American on a horse, you know it's after 1500 AD. So you're looking at very young petroglyphs there. And the further you go down on that rock, the older they get.
So that six-spoked wheel in it is not an ancient symbol necessarily.
There are
actual wagon wheel.
There are ancient symbols that look like that, but that could be a wagon wheel for real.
Not long ago, I did a couple episodes talking about the Ora Linda book. I don't know if you've heard of that. So it's largely considered to be forgery by mainstream academia, but it's a manuscript that was allegedly handed down in a family that contains a different history of the world since the deluge.
Oh, wow.
And one of the things that's fascinating about it is the script that's in it is they call it Sanskrit or Stanscript. It's kind of like Sanskrit in the word. And the entire alphabet, all the letters and numbers are derived from segments of the wheel with the 6 spokes.
Interesting.
So just parts of the circle and some of the spokes are taken to make each letter. And it's very, it looks very similar to the English alphabet or, the Latinized alphabet. It's an interesting book.
Yeah.
I'll say that.
Yeah. What's it called again?
The Ora Linda book.
Ora Linda. I'll have to check that out. I get so busy with just my teaching responsibilities and then the research I do that there's just so many minutes in my day.
That's why I like my job, John, because I get to talk to the researchers who dive deep into the one thing, but I get to taste out of every person's batch and see how they connect.
And that's wonderful. And so Native Americans, it's not a language, but it's certainly picture writing. And that's how Native Americans view it, is picture writing. And I just a disclaimer for all your viewers, if you do come out to the Southwest or anywhere in the West, and you do go to see rock art, remember that Native Americans still make it, that it's considered sacred. It's sort of the equivalent of what a Christian would think of as statuary of Mary and Joseph in a church, or the stained glass that you see in a Christian church, a Jewish synagogue, or an Islamic mosque. So you never touch it. The oils on your finger can cause it to erode faster, and you should never divulge the GPS coordinates of rock art unless you're doing it with professionals, or you're doing it with like a certified group like the Utah Rock Art Research Association, which is a great organization to join. It's about $25 to join. You can go on hikes led by various experts that belong to the Utah Rock Art Research Association. I usually lead one or two of the hikes a year. I usually lead the summer solstice hike, and we stop at some summer solstice sites so that people can see the interplay of this shadow and sunlight that is definitely part of a summer solstice marker as part of the calendar. So what is rock art? Is it a language? Native Americans consider it picture writing, but it's not a writing per se. It doesn't elicit words for speech, but it's definitely incredibly enigmatic and tells a lot of pictures. So prehistoric Native American rock art is just part of the archaeological record. You see it wherever you find Native American archaeological sites. It's considered sort of part of material culture, the way an artifact is. You see an oya there, a water jug. You see a mano and metate for grinding corn on the right. An artifact is any object you can pick up. A feature is part of an archaeological site that cannot be picked up. It's part of the landscape itself. This is a picture of a pit house. Pretty sure that one's from Mesa Verde, dating to 600 AD. So that's what that's what a pit house looks like when you're just walking out in the field. So archaeologists see that and like, oh, there's a pit house, there's a pit house. And most people just walk over that and you see a bunch of rocks. So that's an example of there's two pit houses right there. I don't know if you can see them. And of course, you never dig up. Not only is it illegal and you can get arrested and get fined $5,000, but it destroys the archaeological record for archaeologists. And it also is considered it's blasphemy to Native Americans, the idea of digging up what they consider to be sacred. So whenever you do an excavation, there are usually Native Americans there sanctioning the work. There's just another example of monomyth usually for grinding corn. This one's a feature though. It's the metate is built right into a giant boulder. So rock art's considered a feature. This is a place called McConkey Ranch in Utah. There's a facial scalp that somebody's had their face cut off. You can see it hanging from that figure's elbow right there.
Man, the feet are really interesting on that.
Yeah, they're gigantic. And yeah.
Do you think that some of the rock art gets there from pareidolia in the pre-existing rock structure?
Some of the rock structure gets worked into the rock art.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah, it's worked into the rock art, but clearly, when you look at rock art that has any kind of humanoid figures, they appear to be doing some kind of religious rituals. And
I once had earlier this year had a guy on named Bernie Taylor who wrote a book called Before Orion, and it was about it was more about cave art. And it's more European centric and North Africa centric. Yeah. But his theory was that the pareidolia that the ancients would see in the rocks would lead them to create the art that they put in there.
Interesting.
And it was like a test of the shamanic capacity of an individual, whether or not they could see the layers of, the head of the deer becoming the body of the man, becoming the crocodile, and there'd be there's multiple dimensions of interpretation laid up in one piece of art. In their work, they would just slightly adjust or scratch out one thing, and then what was already there would come to life to them. And his theory was that the pareidolia of rock art was what led to the constellations being mapped out.
Yeah.
That they started out in the rock art and then started applying that skill to the sky. And that's where the astrotheology was born. I find that to be an interesting possibility because it seems more natural to start to see pictures in the rock before you would start to see pictures in the stars.
Yeah. I can't go one way or the other. I mean, because I'm focused on archeoastronomy, I always put the stars first, and that's my prejudice. And the reason is, we think of astrology today as the human tradition, but most people they have fun with it, but they don't believe in it. But regardless of how you feel about astrology, it's grounded on real empirical science, which is the idea that the changing of the stars 1 degree every night eventually changed the seasons, that new star figures brought new events occurring on Earth. And that's where the idea comes from. And that's really empirical. They're looking at the stars and saying, wow, this star shows up, it's going to frost pretty soon, and so. Oh yeah,
we're deep in we're in the deep end of astrology mysticism here on
So,
the more you look, the more you realize that it is an empirical science. It's not a pseudoscience at all. I mean, maybe some of the way the horoscopes are presented in your Sunday paper are more pseudoscientific, but there is an elaborate clockwork to nature, and the sky is the marker of that clock. And it's just on us to figure out what it's telling us and signaling to us, not that it isn't happening, because we do see the cyclical pattern of nature, which is why I asked that question at the beginning of the introduction about time in the macro. Is it cyclical or is it uniform? And that's one of the beefs I have with the typical mainstream academic in terms of history, is the uniformitarianism doesn't really take into account what I see is the sort of fractal cyclical aspect of how time works. You know, that maybe in the big scale, it's just as cyclical as it is in the year.
Yeah, Eliade called it the eternal return. It's the reenactment of all of the primordial, the monumental primordial events every year get reenacted. You still see that in Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. They're still reenacting the same monumental events cyclically, which is very much how Native Americans did it, and every other pre-literate culture, Stonehenge, I'm sure. So I just want to, I'm just going through the slides here. So whenever you hear the term pictograph, it's a painting on rock. Petroglyph is a carving or a pecking in the rock. So I'll get back to those two figures. The one on the bottom is from Moab, Utah. I used to live about a quarter of a mile from that. It's right by the golf course in Moab, Utah. It's a famous petroglyph. So archaeologists use all these funky terms like anthropomorph for a human-like figure. If it looks like a human, clearly the figure is not a human being in the top. And then they use the term zoomorph. If you're not exactly sure if that's a deer or an elk in that petroglyph on the bottom, you would call it a zoomorph, which they're horrible terms. I hate them, but they use them. And, you have to fill out this form called the Intermountain, I think it's IMAX form, Intermountain Archeological Computer System. So you have a rock art attachment that you've got to fill out. And that's what the kids fill out for the various agencies. And so you have to use these awful terms. But relative dating of art. So when you go to a rock art
got yourself a nice little child labor force there. Yeah,
you could say that. Yeah, they do. They actually do a lot of the research because they've got them like, stand here and take a picture of where the sun sets, So, and don't get eaten by a mountain lion. Anyways, because you're usually out there. We're pretty far out there when we go out and see places. But this one looks like a dry lake bed in Nevada. But the rule of thumb is when you're looking at rock art, the brighter the rock art is, the younger it is. So when you carve rock art, it's really white. And then each year, the original material, they call that the darkness on the rock you're looking at, that boulder, it's called patina, or they call it desert varnish. And it's a whole bunch of chemicals in the rock that eventually leach back out. So the closer the petroglyph is to the original color, the older it is. And the brighter it is, the younger it is. So you can see some of the graffiti there. There's looks like a GA right on the middle of the screen. You can see that's within the last 100 years. And then you see other petroglyphs that are far darker because the minerals have leached back through the petroglyph and repatinated the petroglyph itself, making it darker. So here's an example. You look at the petroglyph on the left. That thing, I know where that's at. That's right along the western shore of Utah Lake. That thing, the person that pecked that may have seen a mammoth. That's how old those rakes on the left are. The one on the right of the bighorn sheep, that's clearly pretty young. It might be in 200-300 years old. It's probably done by a Ute Indian. Superimposition's the other one, when an image is painted or pecked over an older image. So this is they call it the Steinecker Canal summer solstice site. And I did a ton of research at this one. And you can see it's been painted. It's probably dates to about 1000 AD. It's been painted over pre-existing concentric circles. They look like bullseyes, and they're older. They may be really old. Because agriculture starts there about probably 250 AD. Those concentric circles are probably a calendar, and I just would need to take enough time to look at all the alignments and all that stuff. But anyway, that's superimposition when one image is painted or pecked over older images. So you can see that image right there is extremely old. It's the same color as the rock. It's totally repatinated. I mean, that thing, they don't come with date tags, and we all wish they did, but that thing could be 5000 BC. Look how white the broken off part of the rock is on the right. So it's just some examples. You see a figure on the left, totally repatinated. You see images on the right. Clearly, the ones on the right are much younger. The ones on the right are about 1,000 years old. The ones on the left they've got to be 3,000 years old, I'm guessing. I don't know. Man.
Yeah, it gets really hard to even spot it on the rock.
It is. You got to go out at the right time of day, which is often right at dawn and right at dusk is often the greatest time to take a good look at rock art. You can see the difference in the shading there. Again, a lot of concentric, geometric figures. I'm sorry, I meant to say geometric figures, some lighter than others. Again, this is often called Great Basin abstract. So sometimes they call it carved abstract style, just Great Basin abstract, I usually call it. That's what the terminology of rock art enthusiasts is, rock art specialists. Some of this stuff is deeply, this Great Basin abstract style is associated with Paleo-Indian spear points. And so you're looking at that Paleo-Indian period. So again, how did first Native Americans get here? Originally, it was thought that they walked across a land bridge from Beringia, which may be one of the ways, but it's also very likely that they rafted here. It's living, along the shoreline, kind of living a coastal lifestyle. Some may have been just deep sea crossings into South America, because some of the dates you have, like at Monteverde, I think they go back to I don't know, I thought it was something like 15,000 BP, really old sites. And if you were in Utah, what you would notice, the dark blue is up in the top is the Great Salt Lake. There's another lake called Utah Lake, and there's another lake, a giant lake called Sevier Lake. And all the other light blue would have been ancient lakes during Paleo-Indian times. And if you go back and walk, I'm in Salt Lake City right now, but if you could walk outside of my house, 15,000 BC, this is what you would see. You'd see Columbian mammoth and bison latifron at a pond or a lake, and you'd have Paleo-Indians using those, what they call Clovis points, to hunt these megafauna that have now gone extinct. That's a Clovis point. The reason they're specially made, they're hafted onto spear points, and they're meant to do one thing. They're meant to penetrate that hide. You got to throw that thing really hard, or have a death wish and run up to a mammoth and ram a spear into it. Put it in perspective.
Yeah, good luck.
The head of a mammoth, picture a basketball hoop. The top of the backboard at an official basketball hoop is 13 feet tall. That's about the top of the head of a Columbian mammoth. So this is some scenes, some paintings of what it may have looked like to hunt. That one's not real. There's no way you could throw a spear with your arm like that and penetrate the hide of a mammoth. You'd have to use an atlatl. You'd either have to run up and ram it in, or you'd have to use an atlatl. This is
and for people who know about the atlatl, it's, if I'm not mistaken, it's like a sling for throwing spears, right?
Spear thrower. Yeah, this is a realistic image. So Paleo-Indians would have had atlatls, these spear throwers. You would have been able to stand 10, 20 yards back, and you might have had like little kids, like 10-year-old kids, 12-year-old kids, just running up and giving you more spears. And you might have had 15, 20 guys involved in the hunt. They would have been throwing spear after spear after spear after spear. And I like this one because you can be assured that somebody didn't come back for dinner. And that guy that's underneath the tusk at a mammoth right now, that guy isn't coming back. That's what it looked like to hunt a mammoth. It would have been brutal. And then you would have had to follow that thing for a day or two until it bled to death. And then you would have to have a runner or send up smoke signals to bring everybody together, because now you're going to eat for 2 months straight. There's a picture of an atlatl. You can see it's just a stick. You take a spear and you hook it it's got a hooked end to it. And you see the picture on the bottom, when it allows you to throw. I can throw a spear about 80 yards with an atlatl. I can throw it about 10 yards with just my arm. So it's really, can really zip. It's actually shown in the rock art. So whenever you see that thing that looks like umbrellas, like unopened umbrellas on the bottom image, they're rattles. On the top, you can see that long stick with 2 holes in the one end. That's where your fingers went through the loop. The long image is actually a spear that goes into the atlatl, and they used it, way past Paleo-Indian times. They used it up until like 1000 AD, because it's a great weapon for killing other people. If you want to kill human beings, it's a really good weapon of war.
Do you know where the word atlatl comes from?
I thought atlatl is I thought it's a nautl word.
I think it is too, because atl means water.
Yeah.
In Nahuatl.
Yeah. I think
the
it was
Aztec.
Coming from the Aztec, and it's atl, atl is it's come from the Aztec word for throwing stick. This is what it would have looked like. You would have had to butcher the mammoth. There's a diorama of what it might have looked like. But that's what it would have looked like in America in 16,000 BC. That's what life would have been like. It would have been like southern Alaska. It would have been a lot colder. You would have just been moving around following mammoth, living very much like an Inuit Indian, Inuit people of southern Alaska. Only difference is you're following megafauna. They also hunted bison antiquus and bison latifron. Bison antiquus, to give you an idea, the bison on the right is a modern day bison. Bison antiquus is much larger. And they use a special kind of point called a falsum fluted point. The hafting in the middle, that flute that's taken out, is so you can haft it on a spear. You can see a Native American there painting, holding an atlatl with a spear. There's no chance one Native American could bring down a bison antiquus. There's no way. There would have had to have been 20 other hunters hiding in the woods or behind rocks to ambush a bison antiquus. Bison latifron, similar. They had these gigantic 8-foot wide horns. Somebody's not coming back for dinner. That's probably what it looked like. You would have had, you have evidence of domesticated dogs during Paleo-Indian times, and they would have probably helped in the hunt. That's what a bison latifrons would have looked like. It would have been brutal. And what's amazing, so this is a petroglyph near Bluff, Utah, in southern Utah.
Well, I want to bring it to the spiritual for a moment and point out, in this type of world, if, this is really how these natives were subsisting, it basically demonstrates the importance of the spiritual realm and the shamanic practitioners of their tribes, because part of their role would have been to confer with the spirits and find out when and where to look for the hunt to make sure that the hunt goes successfully, or that, the animal is spiritually willing to offer itself up to the tribe, because without that sort of permission from nature and the elements, maybe the hunt doesn't go so well. Yep. Or, maybe they don't have the protection they need and they lose some guys. It was everything would have revolved around this important survival ritual, and thus their spiritual practices would be highly connected to it.
Yep.
Just like agriculture and spirituality in the agricultural civilizations became connected through, the astrology and how that would inform your sowing and reaping of crops.
Yeah, and exactly. And part of the problem is, unlike the cave paintings at, Altamira and Lascaux, a lot of the Paleo-Indian rock art was done out on open face rock cliffs. And many they've just worn away. They've just, over the years, there's very little of that rock art left. However, near Bluff, Utah, in southern Utah, and you can go see this. You look really carefully. You see this. You see a petroglyph. You see a couple images, but let me just enhance it. You can see on the left, that's a mammoth. That thing's a mammoth. You can see the domed head. You can see the tusks. You can see the trunk, the prehensiled fingers. And then for some reason, they showed a bison Anticus bigger than the mammoth, which is not how it would have been. But for whatever reason, that's a bison Anticus. That thing is just a hump on the back. It's just so accentuated. That fat hump is in this petroglyph, which is remarkable. And this is what it
might be
like.
Back to that thing I mentioned about the pareidolia, that there were certain features of the rock that they were working around, and that's how you get the scale discrepancy.
Yeah, exactly. And or if they were showing, maybe they were trying to show distance. The mammoth was farther away, the bison is closer. Maybe we're trying to hunt the bison first, so we're going to show it bigger. But this is the actual, the actual panel itself. But really remarkable. You can see there's a couple mammoth in the picture. Mammoth 2, there's one in the middle there. Mammoth 1 is over on the right. So Native Americans, they arrive in North America 25,000 years BP. If you ever see BP, it just means before present. Hunt megafauna for almost 20,000 years. And then, so I know, I hate to be a party pooper. I know everybody's concerned about global warming, and I know that I too am concerned about carbon emissions. But what causes glaciation, the warming and the melting of the glaciers on the North and South Pole, is what's called the Milankovitch cycle. And it's obliquity, which is the tilt of the Earth, which vacillates back and forth for over a 41,000 period between like 22.1 degrees and 24.5 degrees. When it's further tilted, you get more direct sunlight at the poles, and you get a melting of the polar caps, the ice caps. And then eccentricity is the Earth's orbit, the elliptical orbit varies from a very close to a tight circle, very close to the sun, to a very long ellipse. And that occurs over like 404, between 100 and 400,000 years. And that's combined with precession of the equinoxes, which lays either more or less of the landmass pointed towards the solstices during the warmest time of the year and the coldest time of the year. And due to that, you get more warming or more cooling. So that's what glaciation is connected to. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying that the Earth is not getting warmer due to human carbon emissions and that we need to be concerned about that. That's true too. What I'm saying is that the glaciers are they have been connected to this pattern of Earth's tilt, Earth's distance from the sun, which varies, and precession of the equinoxes, and then something else called albedo, which is the color of the Earth. How much of it is white and reflecting sunlight? How much of it is dark and absorbing sunlight? And that's probably what ended the last ice age at about 6,000 BC. There's just another example of it.
I find it funny that even in the modern sciences, they're using terminology from alchemy, the albedo phase.
Yeah. Isn't it crazy? Yeah, no, it is. It's, science and religion is a lot more connected than people give it credit for.
I love pointing that out around here. Yeah. All of modern science is built on the occult of the ancients.
Yeah. So let me just, again, because I don't want to get shut down and have you get shut down on YouTube. I'm not saying that
I know you have to say that.
Yeah,
we get it. Wink, wink.
I believe that global warming is occurring, and it's connected to human carbon emissions. It's just whether or not it's going to cause a Permian extinction and how soon that could happen, that's up to debate.
But we're not afraid of it.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So just so I make sure I get published the next time I send a paper out again, I just have to say that.
Fair enough.
Okay.
I get it.
So this warming trend ends the ice age, the last ice age. And we go from the late Pleistocene into the Holocene. Mammoth, mastodon, bison antiquus, bison latifrons, giant ground sloth, saber-toothed tigers, they all go extinct. And you have the Archaic period, or out here, we call it the desert Archaic. It's the desert adaptation to the archaic living in North America. All of the animals are the modern species: antelope, mule deer, elk, jackrabbits, cottontails, yuccas growing, rice grass. And so Native Americans are living in what we would call wickiups, or archaic brush structures that are later known as wickiups. And what's interesting to me, and I love this idea, some of the Native Americans never stopped living in the archaic. The Paiute Indians, the Goshute, the Ute Indians were living hunter-gatherer lifestyles as desert archaic people up until Europeans encountered them in the mid to late 1800s. So here's a Paiute wickiup. Here's a Paiute woman grinding pine nuts outside of her wickiup. Notice she's got a flat structure there called a winnow. It's called a winnowing tray. Here's another wickiup. This is Paiute Indians in western Utah. Here's Paiute wickiups, late 1800s, little structures. Remember, they might have only lived in those for 2 or 3 weeks while they're gathering a certain kind of seed or a certain kind of nut or fishing at a local lake. So they're not meant to be long-term structures. They're meant to live in 2-3 weeks every year, and then you abandon them and come back to them next year for the same 2 or 3 weeks to exploit the same food. Another wickiup. And these archaic people, we know that they were beginning to store wild food, because at the San Rafael Swell and other places, you had these storage cysts that are built into what appear to be cliff overhangs. So these storage cysts are most readily preserved in cave sites, which is why they often are associated with caves. It's just that they probably eroded away or got covered up out in the open air sites. And one of the things that the archaic hunter-gatherers do is they map on. When you go out and you see rock art, you look at it and you intuitively say, that's a map. That's directions. That's got to be what's going on. You can see what look like streams, what look like centers of habitation, what look like fields, and they probably are. And that's what you're seeing.
That makes so much sense, because it's a big wilderness out there with no GPS.
None. That's what's amazing, and people don't get that. A Native American would have walked up to that boulder that I'm showing you guys right now, and they would have said, oh, this is this, oh, this is this, oh, this is that. The same way you look at someone wearing a yarmulke and you know what they believe. The same way you see someone walk by with a crucifix and you know they're Christian and you know the story behind that crucifix. They would have looked at those petroglyphs and they would have told a story that we just don't know what the story is. We don't have the cipher. So one of the things that's interesting about archaic is, so these archaic figurines start to show up and they're real ghostly looking. Now we're getting into the spiritual shamanic side of things, Chance. But so between 5,600, 5,000 BC, you get these clay figurines, and all of a sudden they start showing up in pictographs called the Barrier Canyon style. Now let me hang with me for a moment. Look at that image on the right. Look at those clay figurines on the left. One of the theories about that Barrier Canyon style, it's real ghostly. Notice some of it has eyes and some of it doesn't. The theory is that the images without the eyes, well, that this is a portal between spiritual worlds. One of the spirits is coming out, and other spirits who have been meandering across the globe are going in through that rock. So they're going into that rock, and one of the spirits is coming out of that rock, which is really mind-boggling when you think about it.
Well, if you're going to be mapping the environment, I suppose you would also want to map where the entrance and exit to the underworld might be.
Yep. And these Barrier Canyon style BCS, if you want to get fancy and you want to be cool and say, it's not the boys band from Korea, it's BCS style, right? But so the BCS style is Barrier Canyon style is this ghostly. You can see it right there. And it's where I get once or twice a year, I get called by people that they want me to talk about how these are, aliens and what the aliens looked like when they landed in their UFOs. And it's not that I don't think people should be trying to pursue that avenue. It's just that that's not my gig. And there's a lot more tangible evidence that would suggest that it's shamanic rather than aliens from other planets.
Hell, when you even get into the deep dive into the little gray men, you find the overlap with fairy folklore and shamanic, spiritual, demonic activity is so strong that you can't even distinguish them from one another. So
maybe they came out of the rock. Maybe those little gray beings came out of the rock, or something of that nature. And these portals we're calling them UFOs, but they're portals to another world. But getting back to this Barrier Canyon style, you can see how just otherworldly these figurines are. Native American elders often say that if you don't see arms and legs, you're dealing with a deity. So here's Barrier Canyon style. Again, really tough to date. This panel, the panels I'm going to show you probably date between 1500 BC. At the latest, they're probably 200 AD, more likely in the BCs though.
I want to comment on the deities not having arms and legs. This actually really strongly reminds me of the concept of the seraphim, which is the flying, flaming serpent.
Yeah.
As somebody, in my other job, I work with people's energy bodies for helping them in health. And if you were to strip someone's physical body away and just kept their energy body, you would have actually something quite a lot like this. If it was a purely spiritual, energetic being, the similarity to a serpent or just like a column with a head on top is pretty strong. And even to have the left and right leg still there would actually apply, because the left and right leg are pretty energetically individualistic to each other. So just find that interesting. To me, I see a similarity between the concept of the seraphim, the flaming serpent.
Yeah, and just spirit bodies in general. I mean, these are spirits. And there's no, when you walk up to this, the first thing you think is this is a spiritual sacred site. This is pristinely hallowed. It's holy. And you look at you're looking at masked figures. You see snakes. Again, you see a white snake on the left side of your screen. You see what looks like some kind of living, maybe a dog.
We didn't even plan to do this right on Halloween.
No, really. And you see figures inside the figure, as if there's spirits living inside the spirit being that you're looking at. Again, you see eyes and masks. You see, what the heck, that one thing, it looks like a striped penguin. Newsflash, there are no striped penguins in the American Southwest. I have no clue what that is. No legs, no arms, just ghostly figures. Again, now you have a figure with arms and legs. You have a curled snake, what looks like a star. Is that Quetzalcoatl? Is that a Venus? Again, you see a snake. You see one figure on the left there handling a snake. And you see snakes in this figure in what look like rakes. Close up, look at the snakes on the right. You see figures that almost look like part human, part bird-like on the right side middle there. You see more snakes, more rakes, what looks like water coming down. Remember, water would have been the key. You're in the middle of the desert. Whenever it rained, all the edible plants would bloom and blossom like rice grass, which is one of the foods they would exploit, pinyon nuts, all kinds of wild potatoes and carrots. But here's just some of the modern Pueblo Indians in the last 150 years. I mean, look at the mask on that figure, that Pueblo Indian mask at a kachina dance, one of the Pueblo Indian kachina dances. Here's Apache masked dancers in the late 1800s. It's a Navajo Yei dancer, spirit dancer. Another Navajo Yei dancer, spirit dancer. Again, you think about those masks I just showed you and the images you're looking at in the rock art. Notice the horn figure on the right. You see a giant hand and you see what looks like grass growing out of it. Well, that's what it is. It's a hand with rice grass, but look at what's to the left of it. Some kind of bird, and then you see a rabbit. That's not representational. There's some conjuring of the bird life, conjuring of the spirit world, conjuring of the rabbits, conjuring of the rice grass. We got to make these things plentiful if we're going to live. And by the way, in this Barrier Canyon style, in the Desert Archaic period, when there's hunter-gatherers, there's no violence. You don't see any violence. There's no idea of land ownership. You never see shields and war scenes and scalps being taken and heads being cut off, as you see when agriculture starts to show up and land ownership starts to occur. This is, look at those big white circles you're looking at there. They're probably Barrier Canyon style. They're probably winnowing trays for pinion nuts or some other kind of seed that they've got to winnow. And you can see this is at some of the artifacts at McConkey Ranch. The one on the right is a winnowing tray, about 1,000 years old. That's probably what that figure is showing. So I just wanted to point that out. Again, there's a Paleo-Indian from the late 1800s. She's got a winnowing tray there on the right. This woman right here, and the Paleo-Indians actually using a winnowing tray to break the shells of pinion nuts, which were a really delicious food source with a lot of protein. This is the Rochester panel in southern Utah. You can see it has got thousands and thousands of years. What looks like a rainbow, if you look at the top of that rainbow in the middle, you have a Barrier Canyon petroglyph. You can see that little ant-like figure with the antenna. Notice just to the left, on the left side of your screen, you see a really gigantic owl. All kinds of other beasts that would have been necessary, maybe deer, maybe bighorn sheep, maybe antelope, which you see around here all the time when you go out in the country. So the Hopi say that whenever you see parallel lines or rakes in the rock art, it means rain or water runoff. You see it all over the place. There's, again, Barrier Canyon style rock art. Notice you see rakes, you see snakes. There's you got a dog there. You see Barrier Canyon ghostly figure, definitely shamanic. Bring the water, bring the rain. A lot of snakes. And one of the theories about snakes is that, so when you're dealing with snakes, you're dealing with flash floods. Snakes move the way a flash flood does after a rainstorm in the desert. You see all these little flash floods appear. So whenever you see rake or rain symbolism, it could be to make that rice grass you see in that image, make it grow. That might be what this shaman is doing in that image. You know.
Yeah, when I look at this, I just see all the same components of the monomyth in Eurasia as it appears.
Yep.
You know, like I can't remember who it was. There's reports though from one of the ancient Roman authors of, I believe in northern India, Bacchus being worshipped as a serpent called Eve.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And the Hindus chanting Eve, Eve, Eve. Wow. So the word Eve in the Hebrew offshoot languages typically means life. Yeah. You know, and wow. Bacchus, one of the roots there is Bach, which is a river or a stream. There's a lot of overlapping symbolism between whoever the savior deity is with waters and rivers and the sun. That, you know, there's a parallel symbolism going on with the life-giving qualities of the sun and the life-giving qualities of water. And you see that very evident in especially this Barrier Canyon style, finding it really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing when you go out, once you hike away and you lose your cell phone contact, the first thing you start thinking about, Chance, and everyone on the InnerVerse podcast is, man, I need to find a drink of water here. I got about 48 hours to figure this one out. So although with cell phone reception getting better and better, I lose cell phone reception all the time when I'm in the field. Again, you go back to that flash flood thing in snakes. So there's an image of, that's clearly not a representational snake. That's a horned serpent. That looks like some kind of celestial body above the humanoid figure. And then I want to point out something in this figure. This is more Barrier Canyon style. Look at the big eyes. There's these circles with like what look like feathers coming off of them. The Hopi Indians still make these. These are called prayer feathers. They're called pahos. They're prayer feathers. They're a kind of offering that Hopi Indians leave during their ceremonies. And I'm going to try to track this one down to the kind of, there's circular pahos in that image right by that being holding the snake right there. You can see a being holding a snake. Again, on the left, the yellow being, in this figure, you see a snake, and then to the left of him, you see what looks like a figure who's made of rain. More rakes. Just more rakes and snakes and what looks like water runoff. You can see what's clearly a horned snake spitting something out of its mouth. Remember, spitting something out is a symbol of getting rid of the bad in you. It's getting rid of purging yourself of sin and evil. And it's often done in Native American ceremonies. You take certain foods in or drink certain things because it makes you spit up, makes you salivate and spit up. Again, Eye of Sinbad, this one's called. You can see a snake over the figure's head. You see little snakes, water runoff, what looks like some kind of deer figure on the left, just totally shamanic. You feel like you're in a ghostly spiritual world when you're looking at Barrier Canyon style stuff. So are
there any snakes in North America with horns?
Yeah, well, there's rattlesnakes tend to look like they have horns. They have really sharp eyelids. And they look a little bit like they have horned. They have horned. But
the actual horned snake is a North African family, right?
I think so. Yeah, but rattlesnakes do replicate that look because of the way their eyes are. The vipers, their eyes are situated. The Hopi have a major dance that's designed to bring rain. It's the snake dance. These guys are dancing. I mean, this one's not a poisonous snake, but they're often dancing with, diamondback rattlesnakes and sidewinders. And oh my God, it's unbelievable. There they are. And so they have the snake dancer himself, usually dancing with a snake in his mouth. The snake, the person next to him, the priest next to him, has a feather and he uses it to soothe the snake. So they're actually controlling the actions of the snake as if you're controlling the actions of the flash floods that water your field. Too strong of a flash flood, your corn gets washed away. Not enough flash flood and it doesn't get watered. You're controlling the flash floods by controlling the movement of the snakes. These are just various images of Hopi Indians holding all kinds of snakes that could kill you.
The average modern would see what we're talking about right now and be, maybe their reaction would range from horrified to just scoffing at like primitive behavior. But I'm over here like, yeah, I can see how that would work. I can see how that would actually, how you could, how on a magical premise that you might be able to see a cause and effect from your behavior in a sense.
Yeah. Well, how about baptism? The washing away of sin by pouring water over a baby or any other adult, washing away your sins. Or what about just the Eucharist? Jesus saying, this is my body and this wine is my blood. When you take that in, you own a concept of how bread and wine nourishes your body. And Jesus is just saying, now take that idea, but apply it to your spirit. It's the same thing. It's thinking by analogy. Native Americans are doing it. Christians are doing it. Jews are doing it. Muslims are doing it.
Yeah, I mean,
Buddhists do
Jesus is the good serpent, the brazen serpent.
Yeah. Yep. And
This is universal symbolism with the
Yeah.
serpent, and even the serpent relating to water. When you scratch below the surface of the monomyth, it is there in whatever continent you're looking at.
yeah, and for especially out here, that the movement of the snake. If you've ever seen a flash flood out here, if you ever get to hike in the desert and you experience a thunder shower, you just see water. Just you're under a cliff, rock overhang, and you just see water. It's just it turns into 1,000 little waterfalls. It's astonishing. And that's what this Hopi snake dance is trying to bring about.
Are there any other things that maybe haven't come up in this conversation that you could see as interesting correlates or similarities between European, Asian, African with these Southwestern Americans?
What stands out to me is so much of the Pueblo-Indian religious life is built on these kachina dances, and they are spirit beings. They're not like Christian angels. They're exactly like Christian angels. They literally are intermediaries between the deities and mankind, and the deities and mankind. The difference is in ancestral Puebloan belief, they're present at the dances, and they actually have a home dance where they all go home in July, where they dance these spirit beings home, and then they come back at the winter solstice, and then they're present on Earth again, and then they go back, late in July, and then they come back, and it's this cyclical, eternal return. It's the reliving of spiritual life. And
I wonder if that has to do with anything pertaining to constellations that fall below the horizon during half of the year and then are visible at night in the sky in another half of the year.
Yeah, and you got to wonder how much of that has been just concealed from anthropologists, because the early interactions with the Spanish, especially along the Rio Grande Pueblos, they were really mistreated. So they do most of their rituals in total secret. They really their mum when it comes to talking about what goes on in the kiva and stuff like that, which is why there's no photographs. There's only rare photographs for about 10 or 20 years where they allowed photographs, and they just said, no, you guys, you're just going to use this for things that are mercantile and just to draw attention, to make money. And they're like, we don't do it for that, So, but yeah, the idea of these kachinas being the equivalent to angels, their function is identical, and I find that remarkable. Yeah, I do. So.
Is there any kind of calendrical system that they've disclosed to us? Because I find, again, to compare the Aztec to, say, the Egyptian, the 360-day calendar with 5 intercalary days is a pretty specific type of astronomical setup.
Yeah, they embedded themselves in the calendar by watching the sunrise. There was a sun priest, or a series of sun priests, who watched the sunrise on the horizon, watched it move to the north, then it would stop, and it would move to the south. And the big rituals are the turning of that sun. If you don't turn the sun, you're going to freeze to death at winter solstice, and everyone's going to die, or everyone's going to burn up at summer solstice, and everyone's going to die. So those big rituals at the winter solstice and the summer solstice were crucial in Native American, ceremonialism and religious belief.
Man, good stuff, John. Well, I'm looking forward to the next time we're able to talk about this stuff.
So,
do you have any thoughts in conclusion for our audience, and tell them ways that they can find more of your work?
Yeah, well, I would love, I'm not trying to ingratiate, just kind of.
Oh, I think we lost you there for a moment again.
You with me?
Okay, we're good now. And yeah, please ingratiate away. I love having you as a regular. I see no reason not to. Good outlet for your work.
Yeah. Well, my hope is that the InnerVerse viewers will really feel the season, be present at this All Hallows Eve that we have coming, when the veil between the living and the dead gets very thin. And when you feel ancient people, or you have certain really strong premonitions, it's probably not an accident. It's probably someone who loved you that is now deceased, whose spirit is present with you in your life. So grab onto that and let them guide you.
Beautiful, man. Yeah, this is definitely the crowd that is maybe even a little overboard on finding the meaning in every little mundane thing. But when you open yourself up to those possibilities, that's when you feel things like an electricity running through up and down your spine, in that moment of realization when the epiphany strikes that, oh, this meant that, or that butterfly was talking to me, or it was my grandfather showing up in the form of, this insect or whatever. And everything, either everything is sacred and of God, or nothing is. And so I see it as the former, that there's meaning and a message in all, that you can interpret your life just as if it were a dream to be interpreted. And the symbols of your external world experience are just as relevant for your personal myth as the symbols would be coming from the pages of the Iliad.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that compliment, but it's, again, this picture writing is sacred stories on stone. They're really sacred stories. They're spiritual. They're talking about migrations. They're talking about sacred cycles. You had to go to a certain place. You had to exploit a certain food source at a certain time, or you died, So you better be in touch with the deities that can lead you there and can make things work out for you. And I feel like we rely too much on ourselves today. We rely too much on technology, and just be present in the season. All Hallows Eve season. It's a wonderful time of the year.
And where can they find more of your work, John?
Well, I'm been doing a lot of research. On just sent out a article, trying to get a peer-reviewed article on the Star of Bethlehem. So I'd love to come back and do a Star of Bethlehem presentation at Christmas time, if you were okay with that, Chance.
Yeah, man, that is definitely not too soon. We had that great nativity podcast last Christmas. Let's do that again. We'll book that real soon. Yeah.
And I can do a real tight one. I have a lot of better pictures that are easier to comprehend, so you don't get overwhelmed with the linguistics. And if you wanted to, we could do a Native American one focusing on the winter solstice, because there's some petroglyphs that appear to mark it, and it was a crucial time of the year for Native Americans. I could show a lot of really cool, maybe 60, 70 slides of really cool artifacts and really cool rock art that shows how Native Americans view the winter solstice as a sacred moment, and how close it is to Jesus' birth. They believe it's the rebirth of the year, just like Christians believe it's the rebirth of Jesus, who's kind of standing in as an analogy for the year. So I thought that would be a kind of a fun thing for us to work on.
Right on. And then other than that, if people are hungry for more, they should just pick up the Celestial Code of Scripture, right?
Yeah. I'm working on a second book right now, but it's not finalized yet.
Good stuff, man.
Yeah.
Right on. Well, thanks for being here, John. I'm really grateful, and we'll get another one on the books soon.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on, Chance. And thank you so much, InnerVerse watchers, for just being present and letting me share passion with you. Thank you so much.
Cheers.
All right. Bye-bye.
Awesome, people. John McHugh. Give it up for the great John McHugh. I love that guy. Honestly, what I told him, I think before the recording, I wish every guest came locked and loaded with so many slides and such an in-depth knowledge of their subject. Had a lot of fun with this one. I hope you guys did too. Definitely need to be watching the video for this. Some of the slides went by a little quick, but hey, that's what you got the pause button for. This is a topic I didn't know much about and learned quite a bit and was happy. I guess I should say I was happy to see some of the fingerprints of the universal priest system here. And, the question is still open in my book. Are these symbols and archetypes innate to human consciousness and we just find them and pull them out of nature because that's what they actually mean and the meaning is innate? Or is this cultural diffusion, right? Or are these artifacts forged by the same people that forged artifacts in Sumeria? Not saying that I know what is and isn't forgery and what is real, right? I don't. But those are the three possibilities that come to mind. I am really not sure. It's a toss-up for me between the innate contents of our psyche in a Jungian sense or cultural diffusion. Probably, likely that it's both. It's some of both of those, category A and B. So good times with John. Definitely a unique show. We're actually now planning to talk again a lot sooner. We have some topics lined up. He's just a good guy. He's just a really good guy. We were talking a little bit after the recording and he gave me a little more insight into why he's playing, he's so prone to diplomacy and playing so nice, right? Like I get it. So hopefully that if any of that rubbed you a little funny, how he brought up global warming and he's like, I have to say this, understand the world of the academic and how easy it is to lose the standing and the ground that you may have spent a whole career trying to gain in terms of publishing. And why would it matter where you could or couldn't get published? Well, let's be honest. A lot of the armchair researchers that maybe we're familiar with in the internet world and the podcast world, they got their clout through YouTube or whatever. They don't necessarily live up to a high standard of research, or they're not necessarily going out into the field, right? There's a certain thing, it is what it is with gatekeepers, but that the academic establishment and the government bodies and the tribes themselves, when it comes to the natives, there are thresholds that you have to be allowed through, to go see these artifacts, to actually do the field work. And not to mention the people that have a higher standard of research and work ethic that are more likely to read and also publish in the academic journals means that there's a certain level of playing nice that somebody has to do to be in that world. And I respect that, it is what it is. I also enjoy the researchers that just give a big middle finger to all that and say, this is how it is, or this is how I see it. I'm thinking of Dylan right now. I have love for both sides. We got to look at all of the people's perspectives to get a handle on what this world is, what life is. And I dig it. What John was talking about off air, just what sounded to me like a nightmare of trying to get published in certain academic journals and thinking you're accepted and then finding out you rubbed somebody the wrong way because a lot of the people involved with this particular journal or institute have this particular religious leaning and they wear a certain size of hat and yada, yada. So I get it. Just wanted to give that disclaimer to all of John's disclaimers. He might be a little closer to your way of seeing the world than you think, but has to play in a certain realm of official statements versus privately held thoughts. And that's, doesn't take any value away from what he just covered with us. He just show me the money. He showed us the artifacts. He showed us the rock art. Lots of fascinating stuff there. And I think everybody got their own unique journey out of looking at this stuff. And it was a big whirlwind tour, but just imagine having John as your teacher and you're a middle schooler and you're going out doing Indiana Jones shit, adventures, off the grid, no cell phone service, digging, taking pictures, all of the above. I think that's pretty cool. And I'm sure a certain degree of his diplomacy is so that he can keep that particular job and status as well. I mean, this is a guy that does what he does for the love of it. And you can tell. I think that's so awesome. Second hour, not exactly sure where it got divvied up in terms of the free hour and the second hour, but we just got more into what we were into. I'll just leave it at that. And if you are interested in getting the full show and you want to support me, it's rockfin.com, ROKFIN.com/InnerVerse or patreon.com/InnerVerse. Either way, support the podcast you like. Get a little more of it. By a little more, I mean twice as much. I think it's worth your time. This was a cool one. We're going to do more really soon. And I liked that at the end, he gave that offering for us to consider the time that we're in, Halloween time and the veil being thin, and to look for the messages from the other side, because I think they're there. Me and my wife had an experience like that. Earlier, I don't know, last week and a half ago, it was kind of emotional, but maybe it's worth bringing up again because I've had a few people recently congratulate me on our news. And I know that months back I'd announced that we were pregnant, and probably have only said it once or twice that we sadly lost that pregnancy a little ways in. It was early enough in that it's maybe not as tragic or difficult as it would be further along for some people. And we received a huge outpouring of love and support for that. And I appreciate that so much. You guys have been awesome. And since then, we were at this place around here called the Butterfly Palace. And so we're just in this greenhouse type place with a zillion butterflies. And sometimes they kind of land close to you or on you or whatever. And I had this thought about how, well, a lot of times people will they'll feel like they're receiving some kind of connection or communication from a passed over loved one through a butterfly or an insect. I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you ever heard before. And so I had this thought that the spirit of the child that we were, expecting, and in my opinion, still expect, just on a different timeline than we thought, that we're going to do it again and we'll meet that being. But I had this thought that that child would be the next butterfly that interacted with us in a meaningful way, would be reach out from that child, the spirit. And like moments later, this butterfly got all up in our biz and was landing on our nose and on our lips, both of us, me and Jen. And she started crying, and, I was feeling it too. So that's an example of the little things that are waiting for us, but maybe we got to get a little further outside of our box, like go outside or go somewhere where the living spirit of nature is in a bit more flow and abundance and concentration, right? And then those experiences become accessible to us and they become consistent and constant. So I invite you guys, before it gets too cold out there, get outside, get on a hike, go camping. Hopefully I take my own advice, but at the very least, I saw some butterflies. I also asked John when he was born, like what year or what part of the year. So if anybody out there was wondering, John's a late Cancer, early Leo, or on the cusp basically, but he's in the Cancer Leo cusp on the Cancer side. So he's feeling it. He's feeling all the stuff, the mystic emotions, and he does a good job being the academic and presenting everything all right. But, he's feeling it deeply. I really like this guy. Looking forward to more with him. Could not recommend any more highly than 150% recommendation. That's what I recommend his book at, The Celestial Code of Scripture. I enjoyed the heck out of it. It's one of my favorite books I've ever read. Huge keys. I'm sure it's going to be referenced in future books that I write someday. I'm sure of that. So check it out, read it, enjoy it. Go back to previous podcasts we've done with John, 2 others, both very worth your time, in depth and thorough. And other than that, I hope you guys are having a great end of October. Please support the show with the patronage or the rockfinage, or check out Tippecanoe Herbs. Get yourself some great herbal remedies. Use InnerVerse as the coupon code. Also, I've noticed a few people buying from Clive to Carl, the excellent supplements that he provides through my affiliate link. I appreciate that as well. Great way to support the podcast and get what you're going to get anyway and kick some back to yours truly. Help me support my little family here. Love you guys for that. Love you guys just for tuning in, though. Like, it's honestly a big synchronicity and miracle that you even found our niche little conversation club here on this channel, and that you're of the mind and perspective and consciousness to understand and enjoy what we do. So I just want to pat you on the back. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate you. It sure is cool to see the world through these eyes. I know you know what I'm talking about. Like, wow, everything's magic. Everything's magic. So with that, I'm out. You guys have a good one out there and be good. Don't forget, be good because it's good to be good. And I'll see you on the next one. Much love. Peace.
Thank you.